Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1191 Caustic Touch. What are you doing? Attack it! Uzrock commanded, seeing the minions he just buffed, just standing there and watching as the liches were mowed down like dry grass. The massive orc, covered in arcane runes and surrounded by flashy magic circles, also charged at the questing beast. Blotches didn't mind him, or them, calmly casting another spell. However, this time the liches were prepared. After all, they were no pushovers. The third of the 5 liches had already put a shield to block the death ray. In the end, it didn't help him, as the beam managed to break through after a split second. The undead magician still tried to dodge, but he was grazed by the beam at the hip and instantly turned into a pile of dry bones. Even Blotches was surprised by how reliably the instant death effect triggered. It had never experienced this, during the short span of its existence on Earth. As much as it liked to explore the power of the magic more, it didn't have the time. The undead horde was upon Blotches and the green geezer was trying to hit it with his stick. Even with their buffs, most of the undead were unable to deal any harm to it. At best, they were slightly stronger than the stupid druid. The staff wielder was a different story. The dogged pursuit of the orc was scary. It felt like borderline harassment. Blotches squinted, spotting the 2 liches left casting in the back, together with other undead casters. They were using the time the orc bought them, to get off a spell. Metaphorically cracking its long neck, the questing beast found it was time to show off its skills. The legend came at it, swinging his swollen staff at Blotches, but the questing beast evaded. Strategically, it started using its agile leopard body to weave, jump, and climb between the undead beasts that were rushing at it, maiming quite a few of the biggest in the process. The orc might have become a legend, but he was still an orc shaman. A bipedal creature focused on strength and magic, lacking the agility and speed to compare with the questing beast. Standing on the shoulders of a giant, Blotches had created the perfect moment. The numerical advantage had become a disadvantage. The questing beast had brought too big bodies between itself and the legend, for the orc to reach it. Just enough quiet time, to cast another death ray, disintegrating another lich and breaking the spell they were trying to cast on their own. The next moment, it suffered a heavy blow from the side and was shot off the body it was standing on. With all his rapid pursuit, Blotches forgot the most important thing about Uzrock. He was a shaman. At the same time, Blotches used to cast a spell, the orc also spent on casting an attack. The beast plummeted to the ground, feeling a terrifying burn on its left shoulder and side. Ding! You have been afflicted by Uzrock's caustic touch. Minus 75 health every 10 seconds for 2 minutes. Ignoring the pain, it quickly got up and created some distance. The shaman actually managed to give it a status ailment. Using a shortened chant, it cast Cure, a spell to get rid of debuffs like damage over time, however. Ding! Your skill level is too low. The spell had failed to cure Uzrock's caustic touch. Haha, did you think a messy healing spell like that could save your life? The shaman mocked the questing beast, just before bringing his stick down on its head. Of course, he wouldn't wait for Blotches to deal with the problem. Blotches snorted, evading the potentially fatal attack, weaving and killing its way into the crowd of undead again. Its shoulder and side hurt with every move, as the skin was stretched. It had little time to look, but it felt like its skin and flesh were being eaten away. Fine then, it thought, if an elegant way doesn't work, I will brute force it. It decided defiantly. If that scrawny little caster with his toothpick thought it would die from his tricks, then he was wrong. Who needed magic anyway? Not Blotches. Activating the skill Greater Regeneration, the questing beast doubled its already impressive health regeneration, overcoming the dot with pure, passive healing. It was a cool feeling of relief, as the wound not just stopped spreading, but quickly started closing. The dot was still active, but its flesh healed quicker than the magic could eat it away. Since it had already stepped on the path of brute force, there was no reason to leave it that quickly again. Once again, Blotches brought a wall of useless meat between the orc and itself, replicating the previous strategy. But when the moment came, when it would cast the death ray to kill the last lich, it betrayed expectations and didn't stop. It used Leopard Charge, a movement skill that used an alleviated position to jump down on its victim, to directly attack the remaining lich. The undead caster was crushed to powder under its hooves. Swiping the sharp hooves left and right, it also took care of the other casters, that had mingled in the back and tried to cobble a spell together. Now, there was only the legend it had to worry about, left on the field. The Parrot of Doom had left the battlefield, to catch some more important prey. Circling in the sky above the valley, the elemental had one of the best views of the current situation. Ceres had noticed the beasts that appeared from the portal. It didn't care to bother with the giant rhino that dropped into the city, that the business of the field teams inside. The undead shadow leopard and arachne, on the other hand, aimed for the colossus and dragon, wrestling it out among the crippled mountains. Hellion, one of their youngest siblings, was already struggling, just keeping the dragon occupied. But that was not all. On the way there was also Heads, entangled with the Hydra. Both were battles of golems, struggling to keep legendary beasts occupied. If those two creatures joined either battle, it would quickly take a turn for the worse. The situation was balanced in their favor for now, but if the legends managed to defeat Hellion and Heads, there would suddenly be two legends, free to roam and interfere with the rest of the battlefield. This was why Ceres left blotches to buy time with the shaman and quickly eliminate those two troublemakers. Ceres quickly appeared in the sky above the running leopard and scuttling spider and started casting lighting at the two undead servants. However, they were more resilient than expected. The shadow leopard was using its agility and inform ability to melt into shadows to evade the lighting. On the other hand, the arachne was able to divert his lighting. While the spider body was running on at full speed, the human half on its top was using a skill to generate strings and nets. Whenever she was about to be hit by a lightning bolt, she would throw a net in the air, which diverted the attack away from her body. The storm elemental smirked internally, as his beak was not able to express such emotion. Were they trying to stall for time, like how blotches did with the shaman? But such childish tricks wouldn't work the elemental. As the incarnation of storm, lightning was not his only element. Flapping his wings several times, he summoned the storm. Terrifying wind began blowing down the mountain slopes below Delta. A localized hurricane began to rage surrounding the two undead beasts. It did not deal any noticeable damage, but it rendered her strategy of deploying nets useless, as the whimsy string was quickly blown away by the raging winds. The leopard evaded, but the arachne was struck by lightning this time. She stumbled, she slowed down, but a single strike was unable to kill the Leave 180+ beast. Not even if it was the tormentor's lightning. However, the spider lady still stopped after running on for a moment and looked up at the sky with a grin. Why was she grinning? Chapter 1192 Rhinoceros of Destruction. Delta. Collapsed skyscrapers framed the rim of the crater. The early morning sun fell on a cross-section of Delta's underground, with broken pipes releasing water and steam into the hole. At the bottom, covered in debris, two parties faced each other. Two warriors in ancient armor stood on one side. The bull-headed man wore a set of armor, dominated by greys and black. The anthropomorphic lion beside him had similar armor but in colors dominated by crimson. Towering over 2 meters tall, they looked like the incarnation of the Heliopolian gods Montu and Mahis. The lion readied his slaughterer's blades, while the bull carried 2 kapesh emitting a toxic glow. As much as this sight would have pleased Seth's soul as a craftsman, they paled in comparison to the beast they were facing. A black rhinoceros, 10 stories high, which had broken through Delta's city shield and crashed into the megalopolis like a meteor. The crater they stood in was the lowest floor of Delta, so deep not even the rhino could be seen from above. Rhinoceros of Destruction Leave 181, boss. Mike and Ortega had rushed here first, as the ones closest and the only ones currently decked out in complete legendary sets. However, facing the beast at this moment, they questioned their decision to not wait for some of the members that had left Earth to level up. At least the situation wasn't the worst possible. The rhino was not in the best condition. It was covered in burns and bloody froth was dripping from its mouth. Resisting ego and breaking a temporary hole in the shield had taken a lot out of it. The bull and the lion glanced at each other and nodded. They could do this. They had trained together for the past weeks, since Seth finished Ortega's set, as their legendary sets were not only similar in looks but also shared most of their skills, creating a synergy if they fought together. Bull and lion charged together and the ground under their feet turned to sand, increasing the speed of their charge even more. Mike aimed for the right leg of the rhino, Ortega for the left. Seeing the dwarfs attacking, the undead rhino snorted and its charred skin was suddenly covered by a metallic sheen. Mike stacked the blade set's damage to 4,444 physical damage and used the divine skill Storm Slash to attack. However, the slaughtering blade crashed into the thick skin and simply slid over it. He was unable to deal any damage at all. The beast's defense was terrific. Ortega had slightly more success. His Kapesh could not be compared to the stacked damage of the Slaughterer's blade, but their special effects were more powerful. His damage was high thanks to the twin blade trait and the 20% armor destruction per weapon. Where the two blades touched the skin and especially at the place where their slashes crossed, the venom dragon poison took effects and the shallow wounds quickly started showing signs of poisoning, but it was not enough to cause a poison status, but he had also successfully lowered the rhino's poison resistance by 14%. Mike clicked his tongue and used Lotus Walk. Stepping on the flowers appearing below his feet, he rose to the beast's right rump. He attacked again in quick succession, using Mahi's swordsmanship and withering strike, stacking damage to the magic blade. This time, Mike managed to cut several gashes across the rhino's side, proving that its magic defense was lacking. However, that was all. For a moment, he had forgotten that they were fighting an undead. When the only fluid released from the wounds was a black, rotten sludge, he was painfully reminded again. Many of the skills of Mahis were specialized for the battlefield and the fight against many opponents. Fighting one big opponent was already a bad matchup, but since it was undead, it was also immune to the many bleeding effects that were part of his skill set. All he could actually count on was the fraction of divine power carried in the skills of Mahis. While Mike had risen upwards, Ortega had stayed with the left leg and rammed one of the Kapesh into the beast's flesh, all the way up to the hilt. The weapon fashioned from a dragon fang showed its performance when it came to piercing defense. The venom dragon poison worked just fine, even on undead, so he intended to keep stacking damage and lowering its resistance until the poison took full effect, but when he wanted to pull the weapon back out, the leg moved, kicking him aside. The rhino didn't intend to just stand there and take it. The bull-headed chosen managed to the remaining blade in front of him and blocked just in time when the giant leg kicked out at him. Ortega was catapulted deep into the shadow of the stories below Delta. He took out several walls before he came to a halt. Looking around, he found himself on a field of wilted plants, covered in darkness. He guessed that this was one of the granaries that was destroyed in the previous terror attack. The chosen of Monta got up and inspected the damage. He had only one blade left, which meant that he lost the set effect of the fangs of Apep. Apart from that, he had only lost 50 HP from the kick. Seth's slaughter set, made from the bones of Seth, mirrored all the skill of the one Mike had, but the basic effects differed. Mike's armor improved the power of the skills received from Mahis and its effect was influenced by his powers. For Ortega, each piece of equipment had a different effect instead of that, because of the chaotic trait of the material. Seth had explained it to him, but Ortega only retained the basic important stuff. The Crown's foreign lord improved his defense by 75% on foreign soil. Ortega was originally born in Beta and moved to Delta when he was a child, so his defense was always boosted when he wore the armor. Off in the distance, he saw the hole he left in the wall. While Ortega rushed back, Mike was left to struggle against the rhino on his own, trying to stack the divine power of Mahis on the undead. Although he managed to cover it in shallow wounds, Rampage began cornering Mike. Things didn't go too well on his end. Outside Delta. Am I seeing things? Cromwell asked breathlessly as he saw what happened at the slopes below Delta. The terrifying lightning eagle was actually struggling. It had stalled the arachne and the leopard with a storm, but it suddenly started struggling to stay in the air. The Spider-Woman had spread her threads in the wind and used them to entangle Ceres above, Hoskin said, as emotionless as ever. The Death Knight was watching the fight with the magical scope they had originally used to observe Spatia. The arachne managed to stall Ceres, then wouldn't the leopard intervene in the fight of the two snake heads? If that happened, there was a chance that everything would cascade, ending in their defeat. Things seemed dire once again. And it's still not time to intervene, the scientist asked again. The black armor shook its helmet and pointed at the snaky mess, where the shadow leopard was about to engage with the bard, playing music to their battle. However, a group of people suddenly emerged from the mountain rock. Cromwell had no idea where they were hiding, but they surprised the feline, stopping it from interfering with the Hydra battle. Cromwell had never seen them, but it seemed that Minas Mar had more to show. Chapter 1193 The Eagle. This little Ceres thought annoyed. The storm and sky were filled with almost invisibly sticky threads that kept clinging to his body. They had traveled up the whirlwind he created himself, and the elemental had a slightly hard time moving, as he was being quickly covered in spider silk. The storm elemental had already tried wind and lightning to rid himself of the messy stuff, but it proved to be difficult. The thread was able to draw and divert lightning attacks, while it was too durable to be cut with the wind. Its mechanic eyes focused on the arachnid woman, who was grinning in self-satisfaction. It had not even been a minute since Ceres was stalled by the sticky mess, but the Parrot of Doom had a short fuse and he was about fed up now. Flapping his wings in one mighty movement, a storm of metallic feathers shot to the ground. Flying with a terrific speed and sharpness, they easily cut through the threads that filled the air and rained onto the Arachne. She barely had time to realize what happened and lost her smile, when she was minced by Stygian feathers, shot from the eagle's wings. How long had it been since Ceres actually used this skill? The elemental didn't even use it in his battle against the mechanic giant. That was how fed up he was. Shadow Leopard Leave 183. Chains of light caught the giant creature's leg for probably the third time, shortly stopping its movements before breaking. And for the second time, the off-tank was crushed by the massive paws, in an attempt to sever what he was crushed by. Boudica and the Fae of her guild that stayed on Earth had come to Reiki's reinforcement, facing the Leave 183 undead Shadow Leopard. Although the guild was bigger, there were only 30 people, the Fae, as they were technically immortal. Other members stayed in Delta to help defend the walls. While the mess of snakes biting each other was going on in the background, they had surrounded the big cat. They were lucky the sun had just risen and the leopard was weakened as many of its skills depended on the darkness. If it could, it would have probably ignored them. As it had a mission, it kept trying to escape and attack Heads or Reiki, who were keeping the legendary Hydra in check. They were under immense pressure, as everything hinged now on them. With an average level of 85, the Fae were strong by player standards, but they couldn't compare to someone who was able to step on the path to legend like Reiki. Unlike Orihuma, many of them had long reached their level limit. Even Boudica's level had come to a hard stop at Leave 95. They had to fully rely on their party play and the fact that they were hard to kill, to barely keep the beast in check. If they didn't throw themselves into the battle with the resolve to suffer, it would have already escaped. They all knew full well how much was at stake here and were ready to pay with their blood. Ka. Boudica was about to rush in again, wielding the relic-rated sword she had gotten from Minas Mar's treasury when the cry of an eagle almost shattered her eardrums. The aggression carried in the cry struck fear in her heart. A moment later a projectile crushed the massive beast before her. A blue lighting with a metallic sheen, traveling at high velocity, impacted the leopard's shoulder, smashing it to the ground. It halted for just a moment, just long enough for Boudica to recognize the lightning eagle. Its claws dug deep into the shoulder of the undead and with a flap of its wings, it started lifting the beast several times its size, back up to the skies. In one moment, they were battling with their lives on the line, the next they watched the mortal opponent get carried away by a comically small bird. They should have used the eagle from the start. The tormentor did not bother any longer with the small fries. Ceres used the chance to the shadow leopard that kept evading its attacks personally and took it to the sky. The golem already had a good idea of how to deal with the undead. They were flying high above Delta, and still rising. Below, they could see the ecosystem and the fight of the Lich with the Eye-Visor and the Imuji. There was also a new swarm of beasts, that tried passing through Ego and the gap in the shield, while Puffles and Tatzel were busy. Asterion was completely bound in battles, against the stronger remnant of the first wave. The leopard in its claws began to struggle, despite its many broken bones from the earlier impact. Ceres simply tightened its grip and kept flying even higher. Would the undead die if the eagle dropped it from this height? Maybe, but a creature of its strength shouldn't be underestimated. Maybe it had ways to survive and heal. No, the Parrot of Doom had chosen a different fate for the beast. The distance to Delta grew and the city became smaller in the distance. Instead, the crater of the central volcano into view. Krina had deployed a great enchantment formation to calm the mountain and stop it from eruption, but it was still very much active. When the orange glow of lava could be seen through the dark clouds of smoke, the undead seemed to realize what Ceres was going to do with it. Its struggle grew desperate, to the point that its rotted flesh and broken bones started tearing in an attempt to rip itself free from the eagle's grip. But that also stopped after a light electroshock therapy. Limp and paralyzed, the frightening beast, a ruler of shadows, could only watch its end drawing closer. Directly above the crater, the claws finally released it, but it was not happy about the freedom it had longed for previously. Unable to do anything, it could only watch the lava rush at it, before the end was here. Ceres was quite happy with itself. The undead had submerged in the lava with a massive splash, before its burning carcass was pushed back up, floating on the molten rock. A great idea and a marvelous execution. He circled once more, twice more, to watch the undead burn and make sure it was over before the elemental returned to Delta. The staff in her hand was creaking in misery, as she grabbed the legendary artifact harder and harder. That bird. She thought the centipede was annoying, but the feather brain was even worse. It was all the fault of that sparking menace. The invasion of Delta had come to a standstill. With Uzrock being swept away and being contained by the weird creature called a questing beast, the undead siege was unable to overpower the necromancer and their army on the walls. Her arachne and her leopard had also died to that stupid bird. They were once again at a standstill on the outside. At least the Rhino of Destruction managed to create a breach in the shield, so things were looking better. "Send the teams in now," she commanded, her voice trembling with contained rage. "Why, Your Highness, are you sure? The tree has not appeared yet. If we send the teams in now and Minasmar reveals another legend," the adjutant stopped speaking when Nadina raised her hand. "Do not worry. Things will take a turn from now on. If the tree comes out, I will take care of it." She spoke with certainty. As she looked at the raging battles in the distance, a purple spark shone in her eyes. Sosuke may have stopped her from this, but he wasn't here to do so. The fuse of the Chosen of Kali was much longer than that of the Storm Elemental, but it had been burning for a long time. Chapter 1194 Purple Bloom. Ugh! Mike groaned when the Rhino finally managed to smack him with its head. Despite his skills and equipment, he was unable to overcome the 50-level difference in their levels. Just like with legends, depending on the path they took, the difference in power could differ vastly. The difference between single levels was much greater beyond Level 100, and even before the Ascension, the specialization could stretch that difference even further. It may sound like an excuse, but on top of the large level difference, the opponent had also a much bigger body with higher stats and attributes in general. Although the Catman had next to no chance of success, he still stood up again. The Slaughter set was not overly focused on defense, but the blunt force was far from enough to take him out. He just needed to hold on for Ortega to return. Together they would definitely be able to stall for reinforcement. Barely dodging the beast's follow-up attack, the Chosen of Mahis attacked the side of its massive skull. The skin was thinner here, and Mike could actually feel the blade slide over the bone below, as they cut the skin and flesh. Maybe he could have done more if he got the time to channel an AoE skill, but the Rhino didn't give him the time to cast. He had to rely on his swordsmanship and quick skills to survive. Distracted by his success for just a moment, he gave the Rhino the chance to counter, as suddenly its whole body fell in his direction. It was seriously trying to crush him with a body check. Mike had no choice but to use Charge and Lotus Walk to get far enough into the underground floors of Delta, to escape the beast, widening the hole it dug. He almost fell, when the foundations below Delta started crumbling away under the attack of the raging undead. He managed to flee further into the skies, thanks to the lotuses appearing in the air. Here he was also able to see Ortega's return. The bull-headed man rushed up toward the beast's belly, grabbing the capeche he lost on his way there. Re-equipped with both of his blades, he began spamming slashes wildly, cutting up the Rhino's underbelly. There was no blood, but the wounds started oozing sludge and releasing white smoke. Roarf! The Rhinoceros of Destruction roared, but for the first time, there was a little more than pure wrath audible in the sound. Hurriedly it tried to roll over and crush Ortega, but the bull also escaped to the sky, and stepped on much darker lotus flowers than Mike. "I finally managed to poison it," Ortega reported excitingly. His wild slashes had erased the beast's poison resistance and allowed the venom dragon poison to take effect on the undead. Now, it was quickly eating away at the belly, like a terrifying acid. They celebrated the success with a high five, but the moment quickly ended. The Rhino below started snorting and huffing heavily, despite being an undead that didn't need to breathe. It was quickly covered in a black fog. The next moment it moved at a terrifying speed, jumping along and crushing the sides of the hole it rose above, attaching the two in the sky. Too shocked to move, they were about to be smacked out of the air, and maybe directly out of life. Eyes pressed shut, they were bracing themselves for the inevitable impact when a bright light shone through their eyelids. A meteor half the size of the Rhino had smacked it out of the sky, ramming it right back down into the hole. "Hey, boys! Need some help?" Jess called out from the sky above. James was also close by, standing at the edge of the hole. Reinforcements had arrived and hearts lightened. Jess' attack had rammed the quick Rhino back into the hole and it didn't seem to move anymore. "Why did it take so long?" Ortega asked jokingly. Jess pointed to the sky, at the hole the Rhino created. The barrier had yet to close again. Hordes of flying beasts were entering the shield, despite most of them dying to ego. There is quite a lot going on right now. We should hurry and join the others before the big event. Yes, let's. Just when they dared to hope that it was really over, a purple glow could be seen in the crater. Outside Delta. Stop that already and fight me like a warrior, the shaman growled, wildly swinging his rod around. Evading the rampaging shaman as best as it could, it jumped and ran across the flooded valley, littered with corpses, finishing off the struggling undead that had been flushed down here. Since it managed to kill the 3 liches, which were judged the greatest obstacle, it continued to buy time and keep Uzrok busy, as Ceres instructed. Its actions served to further provoke the legendary undead. After all, it was not a beast. Its job was to keep the guy here, not to fight him. It knew full well that it just barely managed to survive by running away. A direct confrontation would mean death. So, it had to use psychological warfare to keep the undead's aggro. The questing beast lost sight of how long they had played cat and mouse for. The many close encounters with death, when the shaman's glow stick just barely shaved by or only crazed it, when it was able to evade in the last moment, made it feel like hours. The wounds started accumulating and its stamina diminished. If it became slower now, it might forfeit its life. Now was the moment it had to risk it. Splitting its consciousness, the questing beast used some of its focus to cast a spell while on the move. Sanctuary. Blotches announced a few minutes later, casting a field of healing. The valley was submerged in a golden glow, as the undead still holding on screeched in pain and began to burn. Just like poison could be used as medicine, life and death were 2 sides of the same coin, and the questing beast had practiced both to the peak of its talents. While the undead were suffering from the pure energy, the area of life magic strengthened itself, healed the wounds, and replenished some of the lost stamina. Although he didn't start screaming in pain, it also served to weaken the orc shaman trying to kill it. With this, the remaining undead were mostly neutralized, only leaving the legend and the questing beast in the valley. You think you are really clever, hey? But you forgot something, Uzrok threatened sinister. Once again, the shaman charged forward, wielding his staff covered in bands of magic runes. Once again, its hooves dug into the ground to quickly evade the attack. This time, however, blotches did not vanish from the spot where the staff was going to descend. Its hooves were suddenly stuck to the ground. The questing beast couldn't move at all, as a dark power ensnared its feet. Its reptilian pupils narrowed, seeing the staff coming down on it, and it braced itself for the strike. Several skills were activated to increase its defense and durability just before the Rod of Doom struck down on its collarbone and shoulder. Blotches had taken quite the beating from Adam and was brought close to death by Ceres, but nothing it ever experienced since it opened its eyes on Earth could compare to the feeling of having its whole left side crushed and disintegrated. The attack burned through all its defenses, and the questing beast felt like it was made of jelly, as it shot off, carried by the force of the attack. The right shoulder was shattered as it bounced off a ridge, which catapulted it straight back into the sky, where the shaman already waited for it. Receiving another strike to the stomach, all breath left its body as its rib cage caved in. Finally, it slammed into the ground. There was no further attack for now. The pain was overwhelming at the start, but it had quickly grown numb. Was this a sign that it was close to leaving this world again? It had been such a short time since he opened its eyes here, it was a shame that it already had to go. It knew that one slip-up was all it took to forfeit its life, and it had slipped up. It couldn't help to question how. Now that its body grew numb and the situation quiet, this thought wouldn't let go of it. Just what happened? A shadow covered the sun and Blotch laboriously opened its eyes. Uzrok towered over it, a sadistic grin on his pale lips. Do you know what mistake you made? He asked happily. Was this the moment when the villain revealed their evil plan? The moment of its defeat and the moment to really rub his superiority in its face. But it really wanted to know. Its head twitched, barely a nod. The orc's grin grew wider and he tapped his temple with his pointer finger and then pointed to the side. Blotches followed his gesture and saw a single skeleton in a dark robe, standing outside the range of the sanctuary. The instant death magic was a great move. Even a lich with a phylactery isn't immune to that effect, but you only crushed this guy. So while you were so busy distracting me, he regenerated to take his revenge, the shaman revealed the questing beast's oversight. It didn't know what to feel at this point. Frustrated? Angry? Its thoughts were too numb to feel anything at this point in time. Yes, it had made a mistake, but there was nothing it could do about it anymore. As it stared at the undead legend towering over it, he was suddenly enveloped by a purple glow. The orc clicked his tongue. Tisk, she should have done that sooner. What's the point when I'm already done here? Chapter 1195 Purple Bloom, 2. Above Delta. The skies above raged a chaotic battle. Asterion was a spinning top, turning into a disk of death with the sacrilegious Labries in his hands. Although Puffles and Tatzel were keeping the necromancer busy with a massive back and forth of great magics, the hordes of creatures pouring out from Piotr and the portal above were sheer unending. There were so many that even Ego and Puffles' periodical ringing of the bells barely helped alleviate the pressure on the cow. The Minotaur lacked AoE skills. He only had his great physique and weapon. His only hope was for Tatzel and Puffles to end their fight and help him, or someone else to come and help him. He wasn't picky, as long as someone helped before he ran out of steam. For now, he actually held hopes. From the glimpses he managed to catch of the flashy battle above, it seemed that the two pets of Seth actually had the upper hand in the fight with the legendary Lich. Especially Puffles was raging and hollering, as he kept unleashing waves of holy energy to hurt the Lich. "It's over now, you bony waste," he heard the Ivisor announce, and the giant pillar of scorching light descended onto the world again. The last time, it had eradicated 2 bone dragons and part of the enemy army. Asterion watched in fascination, as the pill's power was concentrated onto the undead Lich. Even more incredible was that the legend seemed to resist it. Inside the pillar was a tiny dark shadow, and maybe his eyes betrayed him, but he seemed to see a slight purple glow inside, contrasting with the golden light. Outside of Delta. "All right. Whoa Black Batty, Bambi Lamb, go Black Batty, Bambi Lamb." Amidst the mess of entangled necks and snakeheads, the black bat reignited in flames and heads. The Hydra giant began wildly crushing the skulls or slamming the body, where all the Hydra's heads connected. Despite Reiki's efforts and the title that improved damage against Hydras, the fight was a losing battle. Heads just barely managed to contain the legend thanks to its overwhelming attributes as a golem. However, Heads were only Leave 151, while it was facing a full-fledged undead legend. Reiki tried his best to analyze the situation. The biggest problem was that the opponent was actually undead. Unlike a living Hydra, the burning of the stumps couldn't stop the regeneration of the heads, only slow it down. It was like a lich, which could regenerate its body as long as the phylactery was intact. The question was, what was its phylactery? An immortal head, buried somewhere? A core in its body? Or maybe it was somewhere completely different. The only way to end this was probably either using holy magic, or death magic. The problem was that Reiki and Heads had neither. Unlike Hellion, they couldn't use an elemental advantage to overcome the level gap. The situation looked bad, and then the Hydra began glowing with a purple aura. The dozens of heads it had grown so far became faster and faster as they bit and tore at Heads. It looked bad but became worse. His arms felt like they were being ripped out of their joints, as he was holding onto the wings of the skeleton below him. Hellion couldn't fathom how it could have so much strength without any muscle or sinew in its body. Or how it was still moving so wildly, despite him putting his full weight into immobilizing the ancient dragon skeleton. The energy of his 5 cores was relentlessly fueled into the holy aura of Helion, who had blessed his existence. Dark smoke was ceaselessly rising as the divine power neutralized the dragon's unholy power, but it was like water vapor rising from the sea. The ocean below him never even slowed its raging, much less did it seem to diminish. The bronze giant relied on the power of his body and the skills that appeared in his mind to wrestle the wild stallion below him to a standstill. Suddenly, the dragon skeleton reared up again. He instinctively tightened the hold on its wing and forelegs, only to suffer a heavy impact on his back, when the dragon threw itself against a nearby mountain stump. Just where was this power coming from? Hellion was sure to be heavier than the whole skeleton, yet the dragon threw him around, despite not having any muscle or flesh. If this was how it wanted to play, his legs tightened around the skeleton's lower spine and Hellion started to pull, bending the dragon's spine backward. He roared as the dragon fell back over. Acting as a weight and anchor, he immobilized it again. This was their constant back and forth. The only part the Colossus of Rhodes had to be careful of was the giant beast's maw and breath. However, things began to change when the rotten bones under his grasp started emitting a purple glow. The beast's forelegs, which he had kept locked together with its wing, suddenly bent backward and clobbered his head. He didn't feel pain, but the force was so great, he loosened his hold. All its joints began bending in an unnatural way, and it used an unforeseen power to finally throw him off. Hellion revived a heavy kick and was thrown against the edge of a beheaded mountain. Slightly bedraggled, he got up, leaning against the mountain slope. For the first time, he stood eye to eye with the dragon skeleton. The size comparison was like an average human facing a massive bear. An unfamiliar feeling grew in his stomach, he felt a little queasy, suddenly facing the dangerous end of the dragon. The dragon was enveloped in purple light, almost resembling flames, making it look as if it had a body of light. He imagined to see a dangerous glint in its eyes. He felt queasy, insecure, maybe even frightened, but an instinct from the depth of his conscience told him that he could back down now. Hellion was facing a predator, running was his doom. In a fluid motion, exerting exquisite speed, he delivered a perfect punch to the skull's jaw, throwing the dragon off. What he had to do now was attacking and never stopping to do so. He followed up on the punch with a flying knee, straight to the top of the head. In that moment he took hold of the dragon's right horn and reached the leg over the snout. Using his knee, Hellion clamped the dragon maw shut. He pushed off with his right foot, using his whole weight to twist the head. The body followed, bringing them both back to the ground. However, the objective had changed. He wasn't buying time, but fighting for his life. Partially seated on the head, holding the maw closed with his legs, he held onto the horn with his left and started driving his fist at the base of the dragon's skull. Roaring like a madman, over and over, with speed and power like a steam hammer he attacked the beast. So what if it nullified 80% of his attack? He just has to hit it 5 times more often then. The sound of the bronze fist pounding the dragon's skull and neck echoed across the mountain range and was heard as loud in Delta as it was at the place where Nadina stood. The heavy strikes became the beat of the changing battlefield. Things aren't looking too swell. Are you sure it isn't time to go, yet? Cromwell asked concerned. The huge number of undead had appeared, storming toward Delta, all clad in the same purple glow. If they joined the current siege. It is not time, yet, the golem repeated, though he seemed a little less certain about it. Cromwell noticed that the golem knight quickly stepped away, to report the situation to Mina's March. Chapter 1196 Subordinate. Friend? Pet. Another one to see the full extent of the change in the battle was Ceres, who returned to a mountain engulfed in purple light. Nadina Durnham had finally stepped up personally. It wasn't just the big guns that had received the purple light. All the undead surrounding the walls of Delta were torches of purple fire. All the undead in the air were burning in their master's power and frantically tried to enter a hole in the barrier. That wasn't all. From the foot of the mountain came a sea of purple flooding up the slopes. It was one of the few instances where the elemental saw the need to report back the situation, as it was slowly getting out of hand. Especially those that had kept the legend at bay barely managed to hold on. Ceres, are you still there? Mary questioned as the parrot of doom had suddenly fallen silent. Ceres was high up in the air when he spotted blotches and fell silent. Deep in its mind something clicked, seeing the big green oaf towering over his dying subordinate. Friend? Pet? Ceres, it came from the COMM link, but the question was unable to reach the elemental. As emotions churned under the glittering surface of the lighting eagle, so did the clouds above as a storm was brewing. Thunder shook the mountains, as the sky roared in reaction to Ceres' displeasure. Thunder rolled across the central mountain and the clouds had grown dark and heavy above the district. The early day had darkened under the dark heaven, cracking with lightning. Staring at the scene of the battlefield, pictures played in his mind. The eagle remembered the scenes of the past when blotches had just become his pet and started following it everywhere, how they played, the fun they had. Maybe the memories were a little skewed by Ceres' own psychotic perspective, but they were real to him, nonetheless. Death. This creature had to die. Unconsciously, energy gathered above the elemental. The dark clouds were pulled into a vortex of raging winds, incomparably stronger than the small storm the golem created before. It was as if the heavens themselves pointed a black finger at the ground to crush the filthy beast that had touched blotches. The orc shaman, covered in all kinds of flashy light, succeeded in creating a barrier, but he could only stare in shock at his impending doom. The barrier stood no chance against the bird covered in lightning, rushing down the index finger of death. Finger of God. Charged Ceres' claws easily crushed the haphazard shield and tore into the orc's shoulders. With an ear-shattering cry, the eagle opened his wings wide to the sky, calling the lightning. The next moment, the dark finger of clouds and wind became a pillar of light, as Ceres drew all the power from the clouds above, channeling lightning into Uzrock. Like an answer to her interference, a pillar of lightning, thick as a city, descended right beside the central volcano, taking her vision away for several seconds. A sudden wave of pain and fear flooded back to her through her connection to Uzrock. Inside the lightning that covered a whole valley, the legend's body was burning away under the intense power of the attack. At this rate, his phylactery might have become useless, as his very soul may be purified by what looked like a heavenly punishment. As rock pain and anxiety flooded her mind and mixed in with her own worries, to create an intense reaction of shock. For the first time, the possibility of losing one of her treasured legends appeared real to her. This was different from the ones with potential like the leopard, or the arachne. Of course, consciously she knew that there was always the chance that one might be destroyed in a tough battle, but unconsciously she never considered that to be possible. Now it hit her, and all the worries accompanying this horrid possibility were added to the chaos. There was no guarantee that a legend would ever be able to recover its status after revival as an undead. The immense amount of work and money put into defeating and raising them again would be lost. Her status in the Empire was intrinsically linked to these undead. Losing one of them would be a tragedy the Durnhams may never recover from. With just one of them falling, Minas Mar might actually win here. Maybe she would lose even more? Then she would have to return to Spacia as a defeated dog. With the number of soldiers she already lost, if she failed here on top of that? No. She couldn't allow it. Answering the desperate pleas for help and cries of pain, the Chosen of Kali focused her mind and supported the orc shaman with her own power to withstand the terrifying attack. When the flood of lightning, burning and tearing at his flesh finally calmed, there was not much left of the orc, apart from his head and a part of his neck and torso without shoulders. At least his soul was not cleansed, everything else could be regenerated with time. If he had that time. When the orc opened his charred eyelids, he stared directly into the mechanical pupil of the lighting eagle. To improve the effectiveness of channeling her power, she had also connected to Uzrok, sharing his vision and senses, so she too looked the devil right in the eyes. "Oh, you withstood that?" the golem bird asked. Its voice sounded curious on the surface, but it had a hidden edge that promised that the orc would regret having survived. Just some little sparks can't kill the legend of the plains. Even if you do this, I will just regenerate. If you kill me, I will simply revive. There is nothing you can do to stop me," the roasted orc boasted with a meek laugh. "Good. I like my playthings, durable." What Nadina saw next was just darkness. What she received from Uzrok was just the feelings of mind-numbing pain and confusion. The necromancer had no idea what had just happened to her summon, but she couldn't help but block the connection. Uzrok was alive, but he was still taken off the board. Even if she destroyed his vessel remotely, it would take too long for him to regenerate from his phylactery alone. Still, the other legends now had the upper hand. It was just a matter of time for the situation to tilt. "Did the special OP set off?" she asked angrily. "Yes, my lady." "Delta. Stop them from entering." "Fire." Azul commanded the mage unit of the adventurers who decided not to evacuate. These people who decided to stay and protect Delta had been divided into several units under the members of Minas March. A mass of spells of various elements, strengths and timing hit the flock of flying undead trying to enter Delta's barrier. For some reason, the hole in the shield was not closing, so only Ego's energy net was standing between them and the city. It was the sudden purple glow that allowed many more of them to survive Ego and flood inside, only to get finished off by the teams that had rushed over once the Rhino broke through. Although they were able to survive the Ego system, most survived it just barely, so it didn't take much to finish them off. The situation was not hard to manage, depending on how long this was going to go on. Mana and arrows were finite resources, while this flock of death seemed endless. They would get tired at some point, and then Azul caught a shadow rushing past the cluster of bodies emerging from the hole, directly aiming for a party of mages to her right. Her idle worries broke off as she rushed into action. This was not an undead. Chapter 1197 Just Don't Die on Me. Valley of Broken Mountains. Hellion had hoped to break off its head, with strikes to the base of the skull, but he quickly realized that the only thing about to break was his fist. Meanwhile, he was flung around wildly, being slammed against a mountain cliff, by the dragon who tried to get him off. Finally, he lost his hold when the skeleton hit him against the cliff at a weird angle. His leg slipped and the maw of the dragon opened wild, releasing the breath on the field of crippled mountains. Rocks turned to liquid in the blink of an eye, and Hellion instinctively did the only move that got him away from the growing bog of liquid rock. The Colossus of Rhodes grabbed the other horn of the dragon, changed his posture, and mounted the beast's neck, right behind the head. His knees clamping onto the spin, barely evaded the breath of fire, flowing along a non-exiting throat. If they weren't fighting a life or death battle, they would have looked like a small dragon and its rider. As he was clamping onto the dragon for dear life, the dragon suddenly jumped up in the air. The skeleton wings burning with purple fire spread out, covering the sky, as the beast took to the air, the colossus still on its back. High up in the air, Hellion was able to see the dome of sparks and the city under it like a snow globe. What was the dragon trying to do now? He was stumped for a moment before he realized that he was probably supposed to stop it, but if he started acting now, he would fall. Outside Delta. The 30-meter-long body of a snake crashed against the mountain slope, almost crushing some of the fire. Heads had lost a head. Despite the shocking turn, Reiki didn't stop his play, just like the black bat didn't stop swinging. As if the Hydra giant was in a bad spot before, things had become completely one-sided since the legendary Hydra gained the purple aura. If it wasn't for the group of Feyre that joined their fight, the golem may have lost more than just one head at this point. Suddenly, the Hydra halted for a moment. From beyond the mountain, they all could hear the flapping of massive wings. He couldn't help his jaw dropping, when he saw the massive skeleton dragon rising to the sky, with the colossus helplessly clinging to the beast's neck. The Hydra had stopped moving because its original goal of coming here had changed. Reiki, Heads, and the others did their best to stop it from interfering with Hellion, but now the dragon simply ignored the supermassive golem and flew back to the city, on wings made of purple fire. Reiki heard a loud crash and the sound of metal ripping apart, as the legend ripped off another of the giant's heads. The fight quickly resumed, just that the Hydra's destination had changed to Delta at the top of the slope. The ease it took off another head with, made it clear, that this fight had completely changed. At this rate, there was no way to stop it from entering the district. Just what would happen then? As the bard was about to lose hope, the severed head suddenly started moving again. Like individual snakes, they began acting detached from the main body and attacked the Hydra. As if to say, that this was not over yet, these severed pythons began winding around and constricting the Hydra's heads and body. There was no telling whether that strategy had a chance to work, but Heads showed that it was far from losing the will to fight. Who was Reiki, to lose hope then? He quickly started changing gears, supporting Heads and the Feyre in stopping the Hydra from reaching the city. Various curses were rampaging in its body, hindering its natural regeneration to fix the damage. The green oaf had gotten it good. For the second time in its short time of existence, it was seriously close to death, uncertain whether it could make it. Its first time was the encounter with Ceres. The lightning elemental had really brought it close to death back then, but the situations were fundamentally different. Ceres had thoroughly destroyed blotches over and over, deliberately allowing it to heal. Right now it couldn't even use its magic or skills to heal itself. Blotches could only lie there and try to endure the curses. The chance of survival was slim. At least the dumb oaf had gotten what it deserved. Ceres had returned and completely destroyed the shaman. Blotches had at least noticed that much. Suddenly, a shadow fell on its face. It could not really open its eyes to see, but it could feel the hot sting of the sun being blocked. The next thing it felt was a cool, refreshing liquid splashing on its body. The terrible pain and rampage of the curses slightly calmed. Was it a potion? Was someone trying to help the questing beast? It's all I could find, Blotches. Hold on, I will get more. Just don't die on me while I'm getting help, the storm elemental spoke to it telepathically. The questing beast's heart jumped in shock and surprise. Who was that? That wasn't the parrot of doom, it knew. The voice sounded almost warm, caring even. Ceres was going to get help? It was hard to believe, but even if it didn't intend to just die here. The intent was clearly submitted through the telepathic connection. Good, keep that fire burning. I will send help. With that, Blotches felt the shadow move away. At the edge of its consciousness, it could hear the metallic wing flap, as the storm elemental left. Ceres wasn't choosy when it came to the people he could get to help Blotches. The closest group were Heads and the Feyre. The lightning eagle had already seen them from the skies earlier. The golem had just risen to the sky, to see that the situation had considerably worsened. The dragon skeleton was back in the sky. Heads had lost several heads, that were desperately clinging to the Hydra in an attempt to stop its advance. The only ones still managing their situation were Puffles and Tatzel. One was proficient in holy power, the other a magic genius. They were able to compete with the legendary Lich, despite the buffs he received from the purple power. For a moment, Ceres thought of attacking the skeleton dragon. Kalsmir was definitely the greatest danger right now. The beast ignored the weight of the golden colossus and aimed for the dome made up of ego and the shield that protected Delta. However, the eagle judged Blotch's situation as more urgent. Heads and the riffraff beside him weren't able to stand up to the Hydra anyway. Ceres decided to steal their mob and waited for his chance. When the Hydra somewhat got out of the entanglement with the serpent-headed giant, it was instantly struck by a lightning bolt, which catapulted it off the giant golem. Ceres! Reiki exclaimed at the sudden intervention, spotting the eagle in the air above them. Heads also quickly scrambled to its feet. The Hydra giant was missing two of its heads, which were still clinging to the Hydra's body. Pull them back, Heads! I will take the Hydra, I need you guys to go and help Blotches. Ceres commanded the junior to retrieve its autonomous heads and leave the situation to the Parrot of Doom. The remaining head nodded in unison, as the two severed ones detached from the Hydra, who was already standing back up. Ceres, you have to be careful. A Hydra is already a tricky opponent, but this one is undead on top of that. We have not found a way to permanently harm or even kill it. We should work together, and Reiki warned the elemental and tried to suggest something, but Ceres interrupted him. All I need from you is to go down the mountains and save Blotches. Whether I can kill this thing or not, is not important. Even if the Hydra was immortal, Ceres would soon make it wish that it wasn't. He had some pent-up emotions to work out. All right, then we'll hurry and help the questing beast. Reiki quickly gave in. There was no use arguing with Ceres. Heads had also retrieved its missing parts and followed the Fae down the mountain. It was best to get away when the storm elemental was this serious. Immortality was a curse, and Ceres would help the Hydra to realize this. Chapter 1198 Rise of the Guardian Tree. The palpitating spear clashed with a pitch-black shield in mid-air. It looked like a knight in dreadful armor, but Azul could smell the reek of undeath from the creature. Arcs were licking across the shield, but Azul was unable to push the undead knight back. During their trip, the former leader of the Chimeras had managed to step on the path to legends and reached Leve 117 before her return. Right now she was Leve 125, but she was unable to gain the upper hand after several exchanges. Actually, the knight had the upper hand in melee combat. The shield he was using had to be a legendary item, the durability and defense matched up to her palpitating spear. Even the item breaking effect didn't seem to leave any mark. Even when she managed to get off lightning attacks during short pauses, also had little effect. It was like her opponent was specialized in dealing with her. Was she his target all along? Maybe if she could concentrate, they would have been equal, but the situation weighed heavily on her mind. The night before her wasn't the only high-level undead that had infiltrated. She could hear the sounds of battle all around, and it seemed that without someone of Azul's level, they were struggling to just stay alive. These people were mostly adventurers who refused to leave and stayed to protect Delta, but they were nowhere near the level needed to survive here with guys like this appearing. Suddenly, a silver whip wrapped around the undead knight's throat and pulled him back. Away from her. It looks like you could need a little help, a hollow voice, with a hint of emotion exclaimed. At the other end of the whip stood a golem knight, slightly smaller and slimmer than the regular ones. You are, the chime exclaimed. Azul remembered it to be one of the oldest golem knights and one who had recently chosen a name. However, she couldn't remember. I'm, Trepidora, it answered, sounding like it had to remind itself, just before the undead knight managed to free himself from the whip. For a moment, the three stared at each other vigilantly, giving Azul the time to check their opponent. Hell Knight, Hector Leve 135. Azul also glanced at the other battles. The screams had fallen silent, as more named golems had intervened in the battles. She was about to have hopes when the sound of impacts echoed in the district. Looking up, her face fell. The giant dragon, wearing the golden colossus like a necklace, had landed on the dome of the city. Its weight pushed on the floating peaks, and its skull hovered above the hole in the shield. Its maw opened wide, but this time there was no bright dragon flame churning in its throat. Everyone, evacuate! It's the breath of decay. Get away from the opening. If you aren't fast enough, use home call. Azul shouted in a hurry. None of the players here had a chance to survive this kind of attack. Even she herself was not sure whether she could resist it. They had to flee, no matter what. Despite her warning, barely anyone had the time to hear her or follow the command. Almost everyone was still where they were when a stream of dark power flooded in through the gap in the shield. This was it was over for her, for Delta. Probably not even Evie's undead could take the effects of this attack. Everyone currently in the city would die. The moment the breath broke forth from the beaming maws of the skeleton dragon, the floor in the center of Delta collapsed as a thin trunk shot up toward the sky. This was it. Finally, Minas Mar would reveal their final trump card. The progenitor tree that spawned the main defense for their little settlements. With this, Minas Mar would have revealed their full hand, and once she got rid of it, there would be no more hope for the blacksmith and his people. Suddenly, it felt as if the world was changing in slow motion. The breath looked like it halted, while the tree grew in fast motion. At first, it was just a small trunk, no thicker than a hair from this distance, but its growth was not natural. The speed and motion of branches appearing was less a growing and more of an unfolding, like a three-dimensional flip book. At first, it was just the size of the buildings, but before the breath of the dragon had even passed the hole in the barrier, it had already reached the size of the early saplings that protected the tree stations. Wait, Nadina thought, witnessing the spectacle. With this size, the crown covered the central quarter of the central district, but it was obvious that the tree was far from finished. Its growth showed no sign of slowing down. In a fraction of a blink, it rivaled older saplings, like the ones covering Little Sigma, or Little Gamma. Now it covered the central third. Wait, the chosen of Kali thought in a slight panic. But the tree didn't wait, it didn't even notice her gaze. There were still no signs of slowing. The dragon breath had now passed the hole in the barrier. The guardian tree had been confined and hidden in the bowels of Minas Mar for months. Karina had given it special care over the past 2 weeks, constantly nourishing it. It was time to unfold its branches and reveal itself to the world. The guardian tree grew further and further, easily dwarfing any other of its offshoots spread across Minas Mar, as the main body saw the light of day. The branches of the crown reached far into the sky, grasping and supporting the floating islands and peaks that made up Ego. What in the world? Nadina could not help but watch the abomination created by the horrors of Earth and the blacksmith's abnormal skills. This was far, far outside her expectations. Where the leaves and branches touched and grew into the spreading breath of the dragon, they constantly decayed and regenerated. But their growth was not stopped, only slowed. In exchange, the breath was actually filtered and disarmed by the tree. Before she could react, the crown had also begun swallowing Kalsmere. The skeleton dragon was in the middle of releasing his attack, while the branches grew past it with super speed, grasping its claws and intertwining its legs. Phew! Kalsmere was stuck up to his rib cage in the sea of green leaves, still releasing his breath against the constantly regenerating foliage. The flock of doom, that had scrambled to get in through the gap in the shield and stayed in the vicinity had been caught by the tree. She had instantly lost contact with half of the remaining flying beasts. By the time the growth finally slowed, the net of energy and lightning arcs, the ecosystem, had become a decoration in the sweeping, emerald crown of the guardian tree that covered not just the district at its feet, but had grown beyond. The shadow of the tree covered Delta and the whole side of the volcano. A tree that could cover a whole district with ease. In this state, it outgrew the size of the hanging tree Seth had witnessed at the very beginning of his journey. When it finally stopped growing, Nadina heard a dreadful notification. Ding! You have witnessed the guardian tree of Minas March. All your attributes are reduced by 50 in its shadow. Bleeding and drain effects are 50% more potent. Nadina swallowed hard. Time seemed to finally return to normal, but the over 2,000-meter high tree that had technically blinked into existence continued to defy common sense. For the first time, Nadina felt doubt in her mind. Even if she stepped in herself, together with Kalsmere, would she have a chance to destroy this tree? A big manic grind could be seen on her face. Maybe not with just Kalsmere. Her heart was quivering, but not from fear, but in anticipation. The chosen of Kali was ready to jump into this fight. It was time for her move. Chapter 1199 Dyro Mold. Fuck, Cromwell didn't hold back with his vocabulary when the guardian tree suddenly blinked into existence and single-handedly stabilized Delta's defense. The floating peaks had become the tree's accessories and the threatening breath of the skeleton dragon had a hard time just damaging the crown. Even the swarm of beasts that was threatening to storm Delta from the sky, had swallowed and dispersed by the growing foliage. The golden giant was also able to get himself to safety, seeking refuge in the crown of the tree, like a golden monkey. Compared to the giant plant, he looked about the size of a gorilla. No wonder Hoskin had told him to wait. There really was no reason to interfere here. Cromwell turned to the side to say something to Hoskin, but the golem knight had vanished without him noticing. Where did the knight go? The scientist asked the thin lady, who was sitting behind him, staring at the tree that suddenly appeared. He left? I think he said he would give a signal when it was time to attack, she said a little hesitant. Cromwell squinted at her. What reason was there for them to even get involved anymore? The tree had already taken care of every. Ding! You have witnessed Dyromold, the core worm. Your movement speed is decreased by 40%. Water damage is increased by 25%. The sensation was like the pressure of the ocean had descended onto him, and Cromwell felt that it was hard to move. It was the first legendary effect that impacted him this much. The culprit was a massive zombie emerging from the portal above Delta. It looked like a giant sea serpent, still smaller than the dragon, but much bigger than Python before her ascension. The head resembled a crocodile with its sharp eyes being completely black, except for the piercing red reptilian pupil, the immortal could see even from this distance. Dyromold, clad in the purple glow, exuded a menacing aura upon arrival, and its pure presence had a huge impact on all the battles in and around Delta. Even though not everyone slowed down by 50% like he did, even Ceres had slowed down, in its battle with the Hydra. In the short moments since the arrival of the new legend, the situation at the walls was also taking a turn, as the undead armies made a push at the same time, their speed apparently rose, not decreased. The core worm himself didn't just stay still in the air, suppressing the forces of Delta. The giant beast, as if swimming in the clouds, dove down toward the skeleton dragon, who was still dispensing his breath, while half its body was bound in the crown of the tree. Cromwell's heart jumped when he saw what happened next. A magic spell, like a whip of purple light, descended from the worm's back and cut into the foliage. Half of the vegetation that held onto the dragon quickly aged and withered away, unable to keep the beast trapped. This was not the attack from the core worm. Calibrating his looking glass, Cromwell focused on the figure that had attacked. It was the chosen of Kali herself, that stood on the floating sea serpent's back, a multitude of arms, made of purple aura raised to the sky. To show this kind of effect against the guardian tree, it had to be a divine skill. With half of his chains gone, Kalsmir used the decaying breath to free itself and join the core worm back in the sky. Delta was safe for the moment, but the situation in the sky had taken a drastic turn. It is time for you to die, bug. Nadina's voice echoed through the skies of Delta, for everyone to hear. The left side of Puffle's 3 pairs of eyes started twitching in annoyance. He had been perfectly fine, cornering the king of rats, but even he had to admit that their situation had turned to shit. The skinny dragon, the smelly snake, and the king of rats, they were now facing 3 legends. Even if it was the Great Him, and Tatzel, they wouldn't be able to take on all 3 at once. The Ivisor turned to look over to the Imuji. Sharing a glance, they came to an agreement in a split second. They had the same thought. Tatzel instantly layered several support spells on Puffles, while the nightmare centipede made a swerve in the sky at an incredible speed. The segments of his carapace collided with unprecedented force, as Puffles rang heaven's bells once again, striking the Lich, the zombie core worm, and the skeleton dragon, with waves of holy power that were further supported by the quasi-dragon's magic. Piotr took the hit prepared and managed to block it with slight damage. The golden waves washed over Kalsmir, pushing the dragon back and creating slight veils of smoke. Dyromold was protected by a shield cast by Nadina, but also stopped in his tracks overall. The combined attack of the 2 pets left barely any damage. However, that wasn't the point of the attack. Fighting a group of cowards is beneath the great me, Puffles cried out as he and the Imuji dove into the crown of the guardian tree, ignoring the fact that he and Tatzel had been ganging up on the legendary Lich, or that they were running away right now, to take cover behind the guardian tree. This was their conclusion. The skies were a little too dangerous, and it made a lot more sense for them to join the ground troops. The necromancer standing on the smelly snake shot another 2 light whips that trimmed the tree crown temporarily, but the pets were already gone, despite the decrease in movement speed. Neither Puffles nor Tatzel were targeted by Ego or blocked by the shield. Before Nadina even attacked, the 2 had already passed through the tree's decoration and entered Delta below its cover. Yet, when they saw the city, it was like jumping out of the fire into the frying pan. Delta. Ding. You have witnessed Dyromold, the core worm. Your movement speed is decreased by 35%. Water damage is increased by 20%. Geraun felt the presence of the new legend. Although the necromancer from Minas Mar left a little earlier, leaving the control of her undead to him, things had been going well so far. Since the Lightning Eagle handled the legendary shaman, they had been able to comfortably defend the walls. However, things had been thrown awry by the rapid changes. Thanks to their fortification, they barely managed to hold in there when the undead suddenly received the purple buffs. He almost had a heart attack when the dragon returned. He had almost no time to enjoy the balance brought by the appearance of the guardian tree when the arrival of the core worm threw them in peril once again. The slow effect hit everyone differently. The improved attributes from the shadow of the guardian tree mostly offset the effects for him, but it was much worse for the soldiers of lower levels. Anything below level 80 received a 75% decrease in movement speed. It was less the higher one's level. On the other hand, the opponent gained speed at the same rate. The moment the worm appeared, a crazy wave of undead was surging against the walls. Even if they kept successfully killing them, their numbers were only growing. The whole mountain was covered and the army of undead surged toward the city. On their side, many of the undead entrusted to him fell, because they simply lacked the skills to help them, as healing and holy magic would just harm them further. How was he going to explain this to the necromancer lady? He had only a short moment to worry about her. This is stupid. This can't be. Commander. They started piling. The divine mode can't cleanse them quick enough. Shocked, Garoun found that it was true. The divine mode was a standard fortification for defensive fortification. It was an area along the walls, enchanted with holy cleansing magic that could cleanse undead and disintegrate their bodies. It was especially meant to stop the necromantic siege strategy of piling low-rank undead to create stairs for the troops to reach the top of the wall. But even if the undead currently surging against their walls couldn't resist the magic, they were rushing in so quickly, that their bodies were not disposed of quick enough. Gah! They are trying to climb up. Reports came from several parts of the wall. It seemed a battle on the walls was inevitable. Garoun already thought that things stood out badly, but what happened next was a scene of nightmares, even though it happened to the enemy. Chapter 1200 Betrayal from the Off. When Garoun heard Minasmar talk about the guardian tree, he pictured the world tree in his mind. A holy plant and an incarnation of the pure life force of nature. It had incredible healing and purification properties. Often it had the ability to create a protective barrier or enchantment around the forest it grew to protect itself and its followers. What he thought was that the guardian tree would have a similar defensive power. A shield, an illusion barrier maybe. Maybe a buff and improvement to the people in the area it protects, but not this. From the crown of leaves, that had thrust Delta into twilight just moments ago, descended a curtain of vines delimiting the edge of the crown far past the city boundaries. As if to tell Garoun that a fence was the best defense, as if to mock all those inert, unmoving symbols of protection, they began to move. There was no shield, no buffs, no holy magic, only carnage. Moving at terrifying speeds, even though he couldn't really follow most of the time, the vines attacked the undead horde. Where they passed, beasts were split apart, but it wasn't the speed or force that struck fear in the commander's heart. Whether it was a giant undead beast, or a small humanoid, once caught by tendrils of doom, there was no escape. Whether zombie or skeleton, the undead visibly dried up, their maws opened in silent screams as the very essence of their being was sucked out of them, turning them into piles of dust that littered the battlefield. The process took maybe a fraction of a second, disregarding the size of the undead, but the hopeless plea for mercy, as the creatures were mercilessly robbed of their existence and erased from the world, was burned into his mind. For not 1 second, he doubted that this was also his fate if he ever stood on the opposite side of this plant. This was no guardian, this was a meat grinder. It just so happened that it was on their side. After the initial shock of the vines, came the secondary shock. Looking down the slopes of the mountain, whole patches of the purple army vanished in the blink of an eye, dragged to the depths of hell by the roots of the tree. Outside of Delta. In a battle between legends, it was often a question of how their power matched. Natural advantages such as size and elemental affinities and specialization played a big role, as much as the defense against them. Legends usually had a few specialties, that were outside of the bounds of causality. Ceres, the tormentor, could cause pain even to the undead or inanimate objects. The lightning eagle could also call the monsoon and the lightning storm for almost no cost. The hydra on the other hand had its perceived immortality, extreme regeneration, and poison. The hydra was a nightmare for an opponent that specialized in strength and physical combat, like the one in its most famous legend. Ceres, however, had no need to sever any heads, or burn stumps. Bolts lightning, thick like skyscrapers, striking in a rhythmic staccato of terror pinned the hydra down. Winding in pain, paralyzed by the charge of the attack, it could do nothing but regenerate and endure. The lightning eagle was the worst match-up for the many-headed snake, in many ways, mythical and attribute-wise. Ceres had already expected the tree to make a show entrance, so he wasn't surprised when the light of the morning sun was blocked by the rapidly expanding foliage. What he had not expected was the visitor who tried to take away his punching back. Ceres. Please, leave it to me. Evie pleaded with the bird. You should go up there. There are 3 legends in the sky, Puffles and Tatzel have no chance to stop them. The Parrot of Doom didn't really see the need to interfere in the situation above. The tree was more than enough to handle it. Since the guardian tree was out, even his punching the Hydra until it regretted its immortality, was not really necessary anymore. He just did it to relieve some frustration. After a moment of consideration, the lightning staccato of thunder stopped. Do whatever you want with it. I will go look for blotches if Reiki and the riffraff fucked up, they were in for a shock. Ceres left, after telling Evie telepathically. Delta. This tree is a lot more frightening than expected, he mumbled. Looking up at the emerald sky above Delta, which caught itself a growth of floating islands. The estimates predicted something bigger than the offshoots at the other cities, but this kind of growth was beyond good and evil. Do you really think this is a good idea? The Durnhams, his colleague, asked, concerned. Her worried eyes kept staring at the tree. He understood what she meant. With the kind of legend they were dealing with here, they may invite their own ruin, however. The Durnhams are just a bunch of upstarts. She was simply lucky. You took Lord Byron's money, we all did. It's too late to pull out now. Minas Mar will be stopped here, today. One way or the other, he insisted as vehemently as he could while whispering. During the earlier push, using the distraction of the undead, they and 4 other elite teams of high-level players, decked out in legendary equipment, had infiltrated Delta to fell the enemy from within. Each team held several siege items they were supposed to install in the city. Originally, the item would have been an artifact that would form a formation to enhance Nadina's powers, to allow her to kill the tree with the powers of Kali. This wasn't going to happen anymore. Even if it wasn't Lord Byron's ample benefits, nobody in the elite teams had any confidence in Nadina as the leader of this expedition. The journey here had convinced them further, and the giant tree had squashed any guilt they may have had left. In Spacia, it should be the strong and competent to get to the top. Nadina was only strong. His colleague nodded after listening to his inspirational speech. All right then, let's hurry and install the gate stones before the stealth magic wears off, he urged them to continue. Lord Byron, the current emperor's cousin, had offered them a lot of money to tweak with Nadina's haphazard plans. Their task was simple. They simply had to place 2 sets of gate stones in the city of Delta. The royal would do the rest from his side. None of the special ops were privy to the full plan, but it was about opening gates to Delta and taking the necromancer's achievement. Whatever little that was since they entered this world. Nadina was lucky that she couldn't be demoted as long as she controlled a legend, but even if she managed to defeat Minas Mar, her social life would be dead, once the imperial family finished punishing her and the Durnham family. Gah! They heard the scream, just before someone crashed into the pavement of the street opposite of them. His body tore a large groove into the street cover before he came to a halt. For just a moment, they thought they were caught. The leader observed the man from a distance and recognized the face. This was a person of interest from Minas March. His name was Jace or something, and he was a tank. He just asked himself what the many were fighting, when the Rhino of Destruction entered the crossing, coming from the same direction as Jim. That answered his curiosity. We shouldn't get involved. We'll take a detour and pass their fight with as much distance as. His telepathic message fell silent when his thoughts went blank at the sight before them. The Rhino of Destruction, a beast that used to be a legend when it was alive, had suddenly been bound by roots that shot up from the ground below. The beast already looked quite dilapidated, covered in burns and wounds. But seeing the creature turning into a lifeless husk in a matter of seconds awakened a primal fear in them. It also showed that its danger was not restricted to the outer perimeter. Wherever they stood and walked in this city, they were in life-threatening danger. Maybe you are right with your worries, but it's not like we have a way back. Let go. Nervously, they continued their mission, in the knowledge that imminent death was waiting for them the moment their stealth wore off.